Hello and welcome to A Sunny Book Nook. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of November. I'm so sorry about not having a regular posting schedule. I've just been really busy, as many people have been, so as you may notice, it is a wrap-up back-to-back October and November on my channel right now. But yeah, let me know what other content you'd like to see. I might do like a gift guide maybe, but I don't know if it's too late in the season already to do that. Whatever. We'll see, okay? Let's just jump right into the books that I read in November. And we're gonna go in chronological order in terms of like when I read it, as usual. I read 17 books in the month of November, which is definitely the like lowest amount of books I've read this year, probably in a month. I have been, as I said, really busy, so that's unfortunate, but I did read some really good books this month, and I'm planning on reading a lot more this month in December, so hopefully I can like make up for it. And I'm only 7-ish books away from my Goodreads goal of the year, so I think I'm good. The first book that I read in the month of November was If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha. This book is a contemporary literary fiction novel set in South Korea and also sometimes in like parts of the rest of the world. And it's basically just talking about what it's like being a woman and being Korean and the beauty standards and the relationships and the perception of other people and like families and dating and whatever. And we follow quite a few different female characters, and each chapter is kind of like from one of their points of views. And I thought that it was a really compelling novel. I thought that it was fascinating seeing these very different women's lives and the different things that they go through, and the kind of class tensions and gender tensions, and also like these really ridiculous expectations of how one is supposed to look and what that means for Koreans who are in the diaspora, and also what that means for women who are like in Korea, women who are young, women who are old, women who are married, who aren't. And I think it deals with issues of like grief and trauma pretty well, and the writing is pretty like acerbic and dry and to the point, kind of similar to Otessa Moshfegh's writing style, because I think it's also written by like a millennial woman. I rated this book 4 stars, and I would definitely recommend it. The next book that I read in the month of November was When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. This is a thriller about gentrification set in Brooklyn, and there's a really strong romance plotline between this white guy who's just moved in, who is in a weird situationship with his ex-girlfriend-ish whom he's living with, and this girl who is having family issues, kind of having money issues, and moves back home to her like brownstone in Brooklyn to realize that like her community is shifting around her rapidly due to gentrification. This book was really fantastic. I thought that personally it was a bit slow for me for the first like 60-70%, but the last bit, that changed everything for me. Like, the last bit made this book a 4-star read for me. It was so compelling, very thrilling, very similar to the twist in Get Out, that like revelation of what is going on, and then a further understanding, like more and more of like what's going on, and as things are revealed and as the community comes together, and that was just fascinating. And as the villains reveal themselves and the tension that leads up to that point, all the different little racist things that happen, all of the weird ways that people are acting and things are happening. It was really fascinating, and I thought that Alyssa Cole did a really good job of crafting this story. So the next book that I read was The Library of the Unwritten by AJ Hackworth. I thought that this book was very weird, kind of corny, and the whole concept is like, okay, there's this library in hell that's kind of monitored and managed by this demon lady type person, and there's this whole conflict between like heaven and hell, and there's another conflict in which stories that have not been finished like want to go seek out their authors, and so the purpose of this library in hell is to house these stories so that they don't go out, because once the author and the unwritten story like make contact, and how like the unwritten story manifests itself into one of the characters or whatever, like it can really ruin the balance of things. That's like the premise of the story, but I thought that it was kind of corny. I thought that a lot of the characters and the plot points like just didn't really make sense to me, and I wasn't invested in the story at all. I thought that the writing was trying to be like witty and funny, but didn't really cut it for me, so I rated it 2 stars. So the next book that I read was Katherine House by Elizabeth Thomas. This has been getting a lot of hype recently, and if you don't know what it's basically about this really elite private institution where very few people get in, Katherine House, and like you don't have to pay money for the education, or like room and board or anything. It's completely free. And there's something really weird going on though. And so we're following this main character who's like escaping her past life. We don't really know what's going on with her, to come to this school to like try to kind of start anew, but she also has very little motivation in terms of like schooling, and she kind of just wanders a lot. That's her position in the story. She is not a character who like does things, like things kind of happen around her and to her, but the environment and like the different characters and how they interact with each other, that all constructs a really distinct atmosphere and has a very like dark academia sense with like weird unexplained elements. And the ending and throughout the entire book is pretty open, like it's not very explained. I feel like if I had to compare this book to something else, I think that it kind of reminds me of Vita Nostra, which is another book about like a private institution, and like the different characters who are in it. But yeah, that's kind of what it reminded me of, and I thought that it was a really interesting read. I rated it 4 stars and would recommend it if you want something weird and atmospheric. But like, you might not like it because some people want something more concrete and something more plot driven and character driven than what this can offer, but like I don't think that's what this book intends to be. The next book that I read in the month of November was Burn by Patrick Ness. I thought this was a really cool book. It's set in the 1930s in this kind of, not really alternate timeline, but kind of, where dragons also exist in this universe, and they have a weird relationship with humanity because they are like hired to do work and stuff. And so there's this poor like father-daughter duo, and the father is white and the daughter is black. Her mother is black, obviously, like she's mixed, but her mother died a while back, I think, and so they're still dealing with the grief and the loss of that, but they also have to take care of their farm, which is like the only thing they really have because they're poor. But the girl also is kind of in this relationship with this Japanese boy who this is like during World War II, kind of, so there's a lot of racial tensions going on, and yeah, so she kind of develops an interesting relationship with this dragon that they hired to help out on the farm, and things go from there. I thought this book was very, very interesting and like a cool intersection of fantasy and history, which I always enjoy, and like kind of sci-fi elements as well. I rated it 4 stars, and I would definitely recommend it if you're into like alternate universe, parallel universe type narratives. The next book that I read in the month of November was Girl, Serpentthorne by Melissa Bashardoust. This was a huge disappointment. This is supposed to be a retelling of, I think, a Persian fairy tale, and basically we have a main character who is poisonous to the touch because she was cursed, or her mother cursed her, or her mother was cursed when she was like a baby, and so she's super isolated even though she's a princess. Like, people don't really, her kingdom doesn't really know what she looks like or who she is because her family keeps her locked away so that rumors and stuff aren't spread. So like no one really knows of her existence, really. They just know that she's like this mysterious princess, and her brother is the prince, and like she doesn't really have any, her friends have been kind of isolated from her because she is obviously like cursed, and like one day this demon is like, I know how you can get rid of your curse, and she's like, oh really? And the demon is like, okay, you need to do this for me first. It's a very interesting like bisexual love triangle where the main character, there's like this hot guard dude, and then there's this demon lady in the basement, and there's like tension in both areas, and there's a pretty complicated like plot that unravels around that, dealing with like dark magic and curses and family history and family dynamics. But The reason why I did not like this book and I rated it 2 stars is because, first of all, it was disappointing because I really, really enjoyed Melissa Bacherdouth's debut book, Girls Made of Snow and Glass, which was kind of a Frozen Ice Queen retelling, and I thought that the different, like, mother-daughter relationships and the different romances in that book were super compelling and the plot was like well-paced. But with here, I thought that the romance wasn't as compelling. The plot was not well-paced. I felt like the first 50% of the book dragged on and the rest of the book did not feel... I just wasn't invested. I was very annoyed with the main character because I felt like in her other book, her characters made sense, like the decisions they made and their emotional processes made sense, but this main character just frustrated the hell out of me. I thought that a lot of the conflicts that came up also just did not make any sense on a logical level, which is why, sorry, 2-star book. I wanted to like this so badly, but alas. Okay, so like the next 4 books that I read were all comic like editions of this series called Faithless by Brian Azzarello, which is a really, really weird comic series about this girl who's in this, like, not really relationship, but, like, who's, like, hooking up with this other girl, and there's, like, weird stuff going on, but the art is super, super cool, and the colors are just beautiful, and even though I don't know what the hell is going on, like, there's some elements of, like, demon stuff, and, like, magical stuff and witchcraft and whatever. I think the combination of all those things just really wonderful. I really enjoy. 4 stars. Shit just keeps getting weirder with like each edition of the comic series I pick up, so I can't wait to like finish the rest of it at some point. Another book that I read while reading the different like comic series was The Sound of Stars by Alicia Dow. This is a science fiction novel about a world where the aliens have taken over, have colonized space, and some people are being like injected drugs or something so that they are the little minions of these alien creatures, and our main character is this teenage girl who is the daughter of her father who has been brainwashed into the system, and her mom is like really depressed obviously, and she is running this underground illegal like book library scheme situation because all media has been banned by the alien overlords because they can spread dissent too quickly, so they've banned it. But so she like has a secret stash of these books that she like lends out to people, and one day one of the alien robot people, he runs into her but he's kind of anti the aliens as well because he's like progeny of those aliens. He's not within the elite status of the alien hierarchy. He's like below it because he's part of a species of the aliens who were created in like a lab to carry out alien orders basically, and so he doesn't really have an investment in like maintaining Earth colonization or whatever. But the other thing is that he like really likes music. He vibes with it so much. He's like, humans made music? That's so fucking cool, man. He's like interested in human art forms, and he's interested in trying to like ally with this girl, and they have like this little relationship, and there's the whole like, you know, trying to destroy the alien empire and whatever. Like, that's kind of the premise of the story basically, right? I thought that this book was really interesting towards the beginning. Like I said, the premise fascinating, but the rest of the book was pretty forgettable and not that compelling because I don't even remember what the hell happened after that. So yeah, I just wish it was better. I wish that it was more memorable. It gave me vibes of like a more juvenile version of the sci-fi novel The First Sister by Lyndon something. I'm forgetting the author's name, but yeah, it kind of reminded me of that a little bit, but definitely not as good. I rated it 3 stars. The next book that I read was Looking Glass by Christina Henry. This book, phenomenal. I've talked about the other books in this series. It's a duology, technically. This is just a collection of like short stories based in the same universe and kind of like following after the events of the first and second book. I think Christina Henry creates this alternate, darker version of the Alice in Wonderland universe so spectacularly. The construction of like the idea of the old kingdom or the old city and the new city being on the outskirts of the old city, and the old city being like a place of drunkards and brothels and fighting and lots of assault and sexual assault, and then like the new city being like the pristine suburbs free of magic and all that dirty shit where Alice emerges from and like sneaks into the old city and like gets caught up in all this bullshit. Yeah, that's kind of the premise of the whole duology. And the universe so well constructed, which is why I enjoy this novella so much, because after we see the events that Alice goes through in the first and second book, we then see like the aftermath of those events, and also the aftermath of her like family in these events. Because in the first short story in this Looking Glass series, in this book, Looking Glass, we follow Alice's little sister Elizabeth as she gets like lured into the old city as well, and that was just really fascinating. We also get more background on Hatcher and his experiences before he becomes Hatcher, as we know, and like this, like Alice's partner kind of, and you know what his background story is, because when we meet Hatcher in the first book, he doesn't really know what the hell is going on either, because they're both in this mental facility and they both like don't really remember their pasts. This book kind of works as a construction of their past and gives more dimension to their characters, and I just thought it was so good. What a beautiful way to like wrap up this story, and it creates a more expansive understanding of this world. I rated it 5 stars, and Christina Henry, I want you to write more fairy tale retellings because they're so good. Like, this world is so good. So the next book that I read was for class, and this was Herland by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. I'm like writing an essay about it right now, so it's been on my mind a lot. I thought that this book, so first of all, I rated this book 3 stars. So it's not that like I particularly enjoyed it or hated it in any particular way, and it's because there's like pros and cons to this, right? Okay, so in this book, it's a novella, it's pretty short. You can find a free PDF online, which is how I read it basically. It was written like in 1915, and that's pretty important for premise of the story, in which these 3 men from America go and explore this previously uncontacted community / country / like group of people called Herland. And in Herland there are only women. Like, it's a community of only women, and by women I mean like basically like cis women, like the bioessentialist, like white supremacist idea of what a woman is. Because there's no men in the society, it kind of is an exploration of what a feminist scientific utopia looks like, at least to Gilman as an author. This book is supposed to be a satire, so there are elements that are just hilarious, and it's obviously very critical of a lot of like feminist themes. It's very much a feminist book, but Charlotte Perkins Gilman is like a eugenicist and a feminist, so there are a lot of very interesting intersections of like white supremacy and feminism and colonialism in this book, but I still thought that the narrative, very interesting, very compelling. The political kind of extrapolations you can take from this book and like the commentary Gilman is making about society, there's a lot of like nuance going on there. So yeah, overall a pretty good read. So the next book that I read was The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. This book was so sad. We are basically following the story of the conquering of Troy through the perspective of Briseis. I do not know how to pronounce her name. She's a princess kind of in Troy, but it gets conquered and she becomes Achilles' slave girl. We kind of follow her experience as a slave girl and the brutality with which Greeks treated like women, especially in like war camps. We kind of see the Achilles and Patroclus's relationship and like the army and all the different things that like happen through the perspective of Briseis' eyes. So brutal, so sad, incredibly tragic, and very hard to get through it sometimes, but I think it's one of those Greek myth retellings that is like so important and like a very grown-up version of what we're presented and what we understand of like Greek mythology, and provides like an alternative kind of perspective and view, which is really important, I think, when it comes to like classics. So highly recommend this book. I rated it 4 stars, but also look up trigger warnings before you get into it, because like all Greek myth stuff, it's very, very, as I said, tragic and brutal. The next book that I read was another novella, and that was Ring Shout by P. Djeli Clark. This book blew me out of the water. I rated it 5 stars. I thought that it was so fucking cool. Basically, it's another alternate history sci-fi timeline in which it's set in, this is like kind of the height of the KKK. There's a re-release of the movie The Birth of a Nation, and in this imagining of American history, there are monsters who are in the Klan. Obviously, like Klansmen are monsters as people because they're fucking Klansmen, but even like within the men, there are like actual physical monsters who like eat carcasses of dogs and shit like that. And we're following this girl who is a monster slayer, and the events that happen after they realize that there's like a larger plot at play here. The audiobook is really, really good. And I thought that, like, the speculative fiction elements of the story, very, very good. The emotional journey you go on as a reader, like, the stakes are so high, and the character relationships with each other are so phenomenal. I just really enjoyed this book so much. Cannot recommend it enough. So after I read Ring Shout, I definitely wanted to get to more of P. Djeli Clark's work, which I still do, and so I read The Black God's Drum. This is set in New Orleans, yet another, like, alternate timeline, and we're following this main character who's this teenage girl who has a god in her head who like speaks to her. So she smuggles onto this ship. There was like the Haitian Revolution, and this is set in an alternate timeline where the Civil War comes to a standstill, like a standoff. So we kind of see a New Orleans that is a neutral space. Like Confederate soldiers and Union soldiers will go to the bars and like not harass each other because they're just minding their own business in this bar or whatever. But this is happening during the time of the Haitian Revolution, so there's this like Haitian scientist involved in this plot. There's the idea that like now Haiti is a free state, and like what is it doing now? Like, can it support Black people in the United States in destroying the injustices of the world, and also like the larger context of like there's a god and there's like a fucking weapon and whatever. The thing is that as you can see through my like synopsis, I don't really understand. I did not like this book. Kind of went over my head in a lot of ways because yeah, I just think I'm a little bit too stupid to have fully understood like this book, and I don't think I was paying enough attention while reading it. So yeah, I rated it 3 stars, mostly just because I am dumb, not because this book is not good, because I'm sure this book is phenomenal, but like I didn't do close enough reading. The last book that I read in the month of November was Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This book was so, so good. So beautifully written. Such a wonderful combination of memoir and indigenous storytelling and mythology and science and biology and plants. Oh, it was so gorgeous. Oh, so amazing. I learned so much, and it was so like immersive and poetic. Wow. It was so good, and I want everyone to read it. I think it was so good. I rated it 5 stars, obviously. It was such a good read. Now I want to go like buy a physical copy for myself and like mark it up because it was just so good. I say that about like every book I read that I really enjoy, but then like I don't ever do it because I'm bad at rereading books, but yeah, alas. So those are all the books that I read in the month of November. Let me know what books that I talked about today like sparked your interest, if any of them did. Hopefully December I can read more. Thank you so much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, all that stupid bullshit. Oh, and you can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter and Goodreads. Friend me on Goodreads and like write in the messages that you watch my Goodreads or that you watch my YouTube videos, otherwise I'll be like, who are you? And decline your friend request. So yeah, do that. And I'm very crazy, very insane, very unhinged. I'm very unhinged on Twitter, so do with that what you will. And on my Instagram, I post less bookish content, really, and a more like photography and art and stuff, which is something else I'm really into. So yeah, check that all out if any of that is interesting to you, and I will see you in my next video. Bye-bye!